New emails reveal that Dr. Anthony Fauci was warned by other doctors that the new coronavirus pandemic sweeping the world in 2019 may have, in fact, come from a lab in Wuhan or elsewhere. House GOP representatives Jim Jordan and James Comer are taking Dr. Anthony Fauci and the NIH to task. We're going to go through several new emails from Dr. Fauci that have been redacted from the House GOP, but we're going to start with this intro from Rep. James Comer telling us about what he found.
President Biden's top medical advisor, Dr. Fauci, publicly shut down the idea COVID originated from the Wuhan lab. But as Congressman Jordan just explained, we now know from emails, unredacted, that Dr. Fauci was warned early on by top scientists that the virus likely came from a lab leak and looked genetically manipulated.
And we have those emails. Now, there's an interesting story that happened with these emails. The way that this worked is the House GOP filed what's called a Freedom of Information Act request. They got the documents, but when they got them, they looked just like this. They were completely redacted. And so you can't see too much of what's going on here other than this is an email from Dr. Jeremy Farrar to Drs. Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci, as well as Drs. Lawrence Tebec. And you can see here we've got from and to the people you'd suspect. And you can see we've got NIH/OD, NIH/NIAID, the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases. We've got Lawrence Tebec, also NIH/OD. And so these are emails between several people at the NIH. But you'll notice that it's not really useful. It says, this is a forward from to somebody. Thank you. See thoughts overnight from others. And this is really early on in the pandemic, February 2nd, 2020, 6:53 before there was even a national declaration of an emergency under Donald Trump. And so what happened is House GOP, they actually went in and they viewed these documents personally, and they transcribed what these redacted boxes said. So they hand wrote it down, they summarized it, and they published it for us. And this is what we see. As to the first box, this is B5 redacted, but we can see this is what the GOP wrote. They say it comes from Mike Farzan, the discoverer of the SARS receptor. And he gives us 5 different bullet points. He says the RBD didn't look, quote, engineered to him, as in no human would have selected the individual mutations and cloned them into RBD. He says, I think we can all agree. Tissue culture passage can often lead to gain of basic sites, including furin cleavage sites. This is the stuff we've seen with coronaviruses. Mike Farzan, though, is bothered by the furin site and has a hard time explaining that as an event outside the lab, though there are possible ways in nature, but highly unlikely. And we've talked about the furin cleavage sites before. The way I've explained this previously is think of a monster like Frankenstein. Okay, Frankenstein is a human torso assembled with a head, an arm, a leg from other different corpses, I guess, and it makes a full human. Now, those different connection points are made sort of where you would see them be made. The head is attached at the neck, not halfway through the skull, because it doesn't make any sense to cut a skull there. Same type of concept with this virus. It looks like, very interestingly, somebody took one part of a virus, took another part of the virus, lopped the head off this one, lopped the body off this one, and smash the two together. And you go, well, that's very convenient. It's connected right where the neck would be. And somebody's observing that in this virus. Looks very weird, like people are just connecting the dots. Then we can see here are a couple other thoughts. So instead of directed engineering, we've got different changes. Acquisition of this furin site would likely destabilize the virus, but would make it disseminate to new tissue. So in summation, Mike Farzan says, so given the above, a likely explanation could be something as simple as a passage SARS-CoV line in tissue on human cell lines for an extended period of time, accidentally creating a virus that would be primed for rapid transmission between humans via gain of a furin site from the tissue culture and adaptation to human ACE2 receptor via repeated passage. So they come through this, so I think it becomes a question of how do you put all this together? Whether you believe in this series of coincidences, what you know of the lab in Wuhan, how much could be in nature, accidental release, or natural event. I am 70-30 or 60-40, okay? Equivocating as to one direction or the other, not absolute, unequivocal, non-lab virus, obviously. There's a question, an open question about this. Early on, this is on February 1 and February 2. We have another person in this other block who is also submitting thoughts. Bob, this is Gary, says, before I left the office for the ball, I aligned nCoV-2 with the 96 Bat-Cov sequence at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Except for the RBD, the S proteins are essentially identical at the amino acid level. Well, all but the perfect insertion of the 12 nucleotides. Says, I really can't think of a plausible natural scenario where you get from a bat virus or one very similar to it, nCoV, where you insert exactly 4 aminos and 12 nucleotides, and you gain this function. That, and you don't change any other aminos in S2. I just can't figure out how this gets accomplished in nature. I just can't figure it out. It looks very clearly like this thing was just sort of hacked together. Very convenient, nice symmetry. Do the alignment of the spikes at the amino acid level, it's stunning. Of course, in the lab, it would be easy to generate the perfect 12 base insert that you wanted. Another scenario is a progenitor of nCoV was a bat virus with the perfect furin cleavage site generated over evolutionary times. In this scenario, it would have been the perfect scenario. That's a big if. You were doing gain of function research, you would not use existing close of SARS or MERS. These viruses are already human pathogens. What you would do is a close bat virus, maybe then pass it to human cells, lock it into RBS, and then that's going to be one of the first cleavage sites. Very interesting. So early on in the pandemic, February 2nd, we've got a lot of conversations that are all ending up right here in Dr. Fauci's inbox, CC to Anthony Fauci. But we didn't get to talk too much about that. We have another email from, similarly, from Francis Collins to Doctors Jeremy Farrar, Fauci, and Lawrence. Jeremy, big redaction. I'm available anytime today except 3:15. I've got a call. Let me know if I can get through the thicket of protectors. Redacted, this tells us, though the arguments from Ron and Christian are presented with more forcefulness than necessary, I'm coming around to the view that a natural origin is more likely. Okay, I'm coming around to the view. But I share your view that a swift convening of experts in a confidence-inspiring framework, World Health Organization seems really like the only option, or the voices of conspiracy will quickly dominate, doing great potential harm to science and the international harmony. Okay? This is Dr. Francis Collins. Now, this is him sending this CC to Jeremy and saying, Jeremy, here is my take on this. I'm coming around to natural origin. Didn't think that at first, but I'm thinking it now. And now let's take a framework and go inspire confidence, even though I'm not certain about it. We get another email, third email, Andrew Rambot. This is going over to Jeremy and many other doctors. It says, Dear Jeremy, Ron, and all. This is from a doctor named Andrew Rambot. Thanks for inviting me on the call yesterday. Here's what he says. These are the redacted notes. I'm also agnostic on this. I do not have any experience of laboratory virology and don't know what is likely or not likely in that context. From a natural evolutionary point of view, the only thing here that strikes me as unusual is the furin cleavage site, the neck of the virus. Says it strongly suggests to me that we're missing something important in the origin of the virus. My inclination would be that it is a missing host species in which this features arose because it was selected for in that host. We can see this insertion in different viruses in humans. We can deduce it's not optimal. The biggest hindrance at the moment is the lack of data and information. There have been no genome sequences from Wuhan for cases since beginning of January. No information about the virus in non-human animals in Wuhan. If the evolutionary origins were to be discussed, I think the only people with sufficient information or access to samples to address it would be the teams working in Wuhan. But are the Chinese complying? Are they showing the World Health Organization the insides and outs of what happened there? No, of course they're not. Email from Dr. Ron Fauci says, Dear Jeremy and others, this was a very useful teleconference. Thanks for convening this. Here is what he says in his notes. He says, Ron says, given the evidence presented and discussions around it, I would conclude that a follow-up discussion on the possible origin would be very much of interest. However, I doubt if it needs to be done on the very short term, given the importance of other activities. My opinion that a non-natural origin is highly unlikely at present. Any conspiracy theory can be approached with factual information. An accusation that nCoV-19 might have been engineered and released into the environment by humans, whether accidental or not, would need to be supported by strong data beyond a reasonable doubt. It is good that this possibility was discussed in detail with a team of experts. However, further debate about such accusations would unnecessarily distract top researchers from their active duties and do unnecessary harm to science in general and science in China in particular. So you can see they're not actually interested in the science or the truth, as you can see. They're more interested in the consequences the revelation might have. It's going to do harm to science. It's going to distract people from their other more interested duties. And it's going to, really in particular, have a problem in China. And so here we're now going to put some faces to some of these names. Here's the reaction to the first draft of Nature Medicine. And so what's happening now by February 4th, 2020, you see Dr. Fauci here from Dr. Fauci. He's responding. He's sending this back to these two doctors who are, again, over at the NIH. And this is Francis Collins and this is Jeremy Farrar. And so Fauci is really kind of upset about this sentence right here. You can see he has these two question marks like, what? What is this? Sort of referencing this, like, why is this in this article? Here's what it says. Serial passage in ACE2 transgenic mice. Right? So he's framing that over to them, and they're not real happy about it. So then Jeremy responds and says something like this, right? From Eddie Holmes, the prevalence of the infection at this stage. I'm 60-40 lab. A lot of conversations about this. Eddie Holmes, I'm 60-40 lab. I am 50-50. He's leaning towards the labs. And so we've got emails now about serial passage in transgenic mice. We've got 60-40 in a lab. And we've got another email also going from, this is from Dr. Francis Collins to Farrar and Fauci. Says, please treat in confidence. Very rough first draft from Eddie and the team. They will send the edited, cleaner version later. Eddie Holmes is this doctor down here, argued against engineering, but repeated passage is still an option. So now his statement is sort of changing a little bit. Okay, so 60-40 to 50-50. Now he's arguing against engineering, still a rough draft. And we can see that is the statement here. Here, another email from Dr. Francis Collins, this guy, to Fauci, Lawrence, and Cliff Lane, and others. Dr. Collins is writing, subject, conspiracy gains momentum. And if you look at this, this is Mediaite. You can see they're just going to be clipped, and it's funny that he's watching Mediaite. But Fox News, their Brett Baer, says that sources are increasingly confident that a coronavirus outbreak started in Wuhan. This was published, sent April 16th, 2020. And so what do these redacted sentences say? Collins is saying, colleagues over at the NIH wondering if there is something NIH can do to help put down this very destructive conspiracy, which a couple months later was not a very destructive conspiracy. It was actively being debated amongst these people with what seems to be growing momentum. He says, I hoped that the Nature Medicine article that they helped create on the genomic sequence would settle this, but probably didn't get much visibility. Anything more we can do? Ask the National Academy to weigh in. So this doctor, who was involved in the prior debates, is now openly and actively sort of saying, how can we quash this story from gaining any more momentum? And while we were all debating this, we were making videos about this shortly after all of this unfolded, while many of us online and throughout the entire world, offline, everywhere, were questioning the origin and not believing anything the government was telling us, Dr. Fauci said, hey, Francis, about this conspiracy gains momentum. He says, hey, I would not do anything about this right now. It's a shiny object that will go away in times. Don't even worry about it. Nobody's going to be asking questions about this. Well, 2022, we're still asking questions about it. A lot of questions, and we want to know what happened. And we want to know why these people who are the so-called scientists hid the actual data from us and continued to proffer forward their conspiracy while the rest of us seem like we've been pretty much vindicated. What do you think about this? You think Dr. Fauci was warned? You think he knew? Obviously he did. So why is he hiding the ball in the way that he did in these emails? Let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. I hope you subscribe. We have a live show that we do every weekday. It's a lot of fun. I'd love it if you joined us on that because I would like to see you on the next one.